one, it's held together, we are the conscious being. The creation is like that, although it's except for on the infinite level. Okay, so based on that, when a person recognizes, basically that they're recognizing a non-dual relationship between the human person and the creation on two levels. One level is on the level of the individual human being in relationship to the whole. So if I realize that this creation is a conscious being, that I am an integral part of the whole as a human, this itself has a profound healing impact for the person, and it heals that sense of separation from bondage. The person realizes that the secondary core beliefs that arise out of that, I've identified as I am in order and I belong. So I am in order in the sense that everything about who I am as a human being, my mind, my feelings, my emotion, my entire psyche, the fact that I experience bondage, the fact that I suffer, everything about what I am as a human being is given a context, and it's a compassionate, really understanding that it's all in order. Everything about my experience is the way it is because it belongs to an intelligent order, and that's the way it should be. So I am in order and I belong. I belong because I'm a part of the whole. My life is given meaning within that context. So again, this heals the sense of separation. And also the sense that there's something wrong with me because I suffer. The person suffering is also given a context because it's understood that bondage is also part of the creation. It's a natural thing, and so of course I'm going to suffer as a result. It's not that there's something wrong with me, so that also gets healed. So finally, on the other level, on the absolute level, the second part of the realization reveals a non-dual relationship between myself, the self of the individual, and the creation as a whole and all beings in the creation. So this heals the sense of separation on a whole another level and creates a feeling of intimacy with all that is. And this leads to the core belief, I am the whole. So that completes the way that self-knowledge heals the psyche, heals the condition of bondage. And I'd like just to say a few words about the process, what the teachings have to say about the process that's involved in this. So it's not that the person gains self-knowledge and all of a sudden they're in the state of liberation. It's a process that takes place over time. The example that I give in the dissertation for this is that when a person gains knowledge, like if you look at the condition of bondage as a big bonfire with all kinds of wood, right? All the network of beliefs that are built upon it. If you look at that as a bonfire and you light that bonfire with a match, and it catches, it's a very small flame, right? It's a very small portion of the massive mound of wood that's lit with knowledge. So essentially, as that fire gains strength and energy and power, it starts to consume more and more of the wood, and eventually the whole thing is burned. And that's a great metaphor for the process. So the idea here is that for a period of time, the person is living in a sense in two different realities. There's a portion of the mind that is liberated, that has this knowledge and has integrated that, and then there's a portion of the mind that hasn't, and this process takes quite a lot of work actually, because the roots of bondage are so deeply held in the unconscious, and there's all the wounded parts of us that have suffered from that and are still living in that emotional reality. So this is seen as a process that takes place over time, depending on what level of emotional maturity the person is at the time that they gain self-knowledge. And there's a lot of variables that play into how that process looks for different people. that concludes my discussion of bondage and liberation. And I'm going to talk just briefly about the conclusion. So the conclusion of the dissertation summarizes 4 basic tenets of Vedantic psychology, which summarize just the conclusions that I've made throughout the chapters. So the way I presented the conclusion is really as these are 4 tenets of a system of psychology. Again, Vedanta doesn't affirm itself as a system of psychology. What I've done is to study the text and to unearth what is a system, what is I see as a system of psychology. And I say it's a system, it'll be clear as I walk through it. It's a system in the sense that I feel it's complete, that it really addresses all the areas of human psychology that are important. It offers a structural model of the human psyche, so it talks about what are the components that make up the psyche, how does it work together, how does the mind function, how does ego identification take place, what is projection, it covers all of these areas. Even talks about the unconscious dimension, it has a term for the unconscious dimension. So that's number 1, is that it presents a model, structure and function of the human psyche. Number 2, it identifies the root cause for human suffering as rooted in the condition of bondage, and says that this is the core problem, really, from which all other problems arise. Number 3, it says that the solution to the problem is gaining self-knowledge. And number 4, that it offers the means of healing the condition of bondage. So it offers what we could call the therapeutic means for healing from our condition of psychological suffering. And those means are twofold. One is developing emotional maturity, which I haven't had a chance really to talk about, but they do offer a very complete ideas about how emotional maturity, how a person can develop emotional maturity through the practice of following the moral order of Dharma, and developing different attitudes and capacities of the mind, how to develop a mature mind that functions well and is cohesive and orderly, and where a person can have more free will and less reactivity. So developing things that you can do to develop emotional maturity are therapeutic means, as well as the Vedantic teaching methodology is affirmed as the means for gaining self-knowledge. So that's the 4 tenets. And finally, I'll just say something very brief about the contribution to Western psychology. So there's many implications in this dissertation for therapeutic applications of this theory. That's a whole nother study, which will be done at some point in the future. But I wish to mention a couple of those just briefly. One is that all the things that Vedanta prescribes for developing emotional maturity are things that can easily be implemented in a therapeutic setting through different processes of inquiry, different guided meditation, just all the things that are already in place in psychotherapy. These things can easily be woven in that context, as far as preparing a person to gain self-knowledge, helping a person integrate from gaining self-knowledge. And there's also a lot of implications for interpersonal relationships, which is basically like the source of most of our problems, in the sense that people are oftentimes trying to get those core needs met through the other person and fulfill that sense of lack. So it could easily be shown how the condition of bondage really is responsible for so many of the problems that we experience in relationships as a result of not feeling whole and okay as a being, trying to complete ourselves through the relationship. There's also profound implications for developmental model of psychology, so looking at how, based on these theoretical principles, how a person develops as a human being, and what is their relationship with the parent, and how does that all play in. There could be models for parenting coming out of that perspective. The last thing I'll say is that just on a purely theoretical level, that this dissertation introduces a psychological model based on a non-dual self, which is quite a new and radical idea for Western psychology to consider as a whole. And so, but if it is considered, I think it could have profound implications. And I do have some hope in the sense that, like I mentioned, the phenomena of projection, that because the idea of projection is such a well understood and accepted idea, even in the mainstream now, but specifically in just in therapy world, I think that it's like I was explaining with the phenomena of bondage being rooted in this inner projection, that phenomena of projection being already so understood and accepted in Western psychology gives me hope that it's not too far of a leap, in other words, to consider that the projection could also take place onto the inner reality. So I see that as a potential place of opening in terms of theoretical conversation with Western psychology. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Payton.
So we'll move to the next phase. Thank you for that. I'll give you a breath. And just gather yourself. And dear audience, thank you for being here. Welcome you to sit with us while we dialogue together the committee with Payton. And I'd like to defer to Carol and Bernice to get us going with anything you'd like to dialogue about. Bernice, I have copies of your feedback, so we've all got that. I don't know if you saw that. So thank you for that. And Carol or Bernice, why don't you start us off, either of you? What should we talk about?
Bernice, you want me to start?
Sure.
So Payton, since you are a therapist also, MFT, I think, MFT, and also a Vedantin, I was wondering if you could talk kind of personally, and then maybe we can extend it, how your dissertation has helped you as a Vedantin, and how it has helped you as a therapist in terms of your own lived experience and work with your own psyche and with your clients.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll say with my clients, I think that having unpacked these ideas and clarified them so clearly for myself and having to write it out, that it makes all of these ideas really accessible to me as a therapist. So I have the language basically carved out in me to bring these ideas out in a graceful way, and also to easily see in listening to my client where there are implicit connections in what the material they might be talking about and how it relates to these ideas. So as a therapist, I would say that. I guess on another level, I mean, I don't know how much the dissertation has influenced this aspect, but I think that I'm very aware of how this teaching for me as a therapist has influenced the way I hold a container for therapy on both levels, both just on the non-dual presence that holds the work, that offers that to be internalized by my clients, and also on the level of just that basic sense of trust in life that I hold as I'm listening to clients. So I think those both really influence the container very much. Personally, as far as a Vedantin and a person who's integrating spiritual awakening, let's see, this has put me at ease in a sense. It's given me a framework, again, for understanding my own process, I think, of living in two different realities and just how this process works. I think it puts my psyche at ease to understand it more, to have it, like to have a map.
More clarity.
Yeah.
Carol?
Yeah, go ahead, Bernice, I might have another one a little later.
Well, just in terms of your answer, I was happy to hear. I don't remember reading. You have it in there, I've forgotten, but, you know, you just get the developmental aspect of that advice of a dancer could be actually put into a more developmental aspect for Western psychology. And I was just thinking about that, how important that would be, because with this condition of bondage, which is a core identity condition, and most of Western psychology, I think, works primarily with secondary, conditioning and secondary core beliefs of identity. So I'm wondering how you would hold the infinite spaciousness of the essential I am for identity with the kinds of visualizations that one can do in psychotherapy, whether it's active imagination, doing subpersonality work from psychosynthesis, but especially the transpersonal psychologies do work with different core beliefs. But what I hear you saying is that if you hold the core belief of the self as a reality, and then you can do those visualizations and practices, how would you hold that for a client who may have absolutely no idea of the self as a reality? How could you hold that for them and still do the work? Does that make sense?
I think so. Let me give it a shot. So I think what you're asking is, how do you help a person recognize the non-dual I am when they're so far away from that recognition?
And even, they might say, oh, yes, that's lovely, but it becomes almost a fantasy.
Right. The way that I deal with it in psychotherapy is in kind of a direct, like, I don't speak to on a conceptual level about it, but I assume that it's true, and so I'll say things to the client that just points to that reality. I'll say oftentimes, okay, well, just for this moment, this very moment right now, don't worry about every other moment, but in this moment, can you just see that feeling as a thought, or objectify your experience? Or I'll do guided meditations that help a person just to differentiate and create objectivity with their experience, which it's kind of a sneaky way, I think, of getting them to have that experience without knowing it. Without knowing it conceptually, or getting into a conceptual idea about it, but kind of giving them the experience of it.
And I think what you're doing there is you're actually creating the developmental process itself by having them disidentify with that objective experience. They may not know who is the observer of that yet, but you're creating the space for them to at least see their experience more objectively. And I think that creates a capacity in the future for deeper inquiry.
Yes. And I just want to add to that by saying that the one thing I've thought of as far as a developmental model is that the parent plays that role for the child. That the parent, the self of the child is projected onto the parent essentially, and so the parent being there, present emotionally, is doing that developmentally for the child.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to what you two were just saying, and it struck me that maybe saying it as a cheater's way was unfair, because my read of your two things you told us you might do when you answered Carol's question was embodying in the moment your felt sense of non-dual presence for your client, and your sense of deep trust in that which is. And that seemed to me to be a way to start putting little matches on the fear or the sense of lack and the sense of separation in the room with your client at the moment. And if you add to it what you just talked about with Bernice, the actual doing with the client and the verbal piece. It seems you're going right at your secondary beliefs by cutting them, both with presence and nonverbal embodiment, as well as the embodiment verbally, what you're doing with the client in relationship to them. You could build a whole system of psychotherapy just around what you said in the last 10 minutes with us.
I agree.
Just an idea.
Especially the parenting part, because it brings up so much of the, the early articulations with parents, and the fact that if those of us who are engaged in advice of Vedanta practices and our parents, I am not, but for those who are, usually I find that a lot of these practices become very individualized. And without realizing it, it's a very, even though you may be in a sangha or an ashram, but it becomes an individualized process or practice. And my other question would have been, and you've answered some of it already, is for the 21st century, how do we bring extraordinarily sublime practices actually down to everyday level of my seeing my child and my parenting my child in the home, for example, in terms of future identity awareness of the child. And also, I was very aware, as you've been talking, that so much of the